Our next presenter is ready to go. He is founder and CEO over at CloudDX. It's Robert Kaul. Robert, can you hear me knocking? Let's get oh, there he is. Robert, welcome.
Hey.
Nice to see you. Nice to hear you.
Nice to be here.
All right, I'll let you have the floor, sir. Tell us a little bit about CloudDX.
Yeah, fantastic. So thank you so much, CloudDX. CloudDX is short for Cloud Diagnostics, and we are an award-winning disruptor in virtual care and digital medicine. I will pause for a moment to mention that there will be forward-looking statements during my presentation, so if you have any questions about that, please review this page in our investor presentation deck that's available on our website. So CloudDX is a virtual care company, a software company, and a company that creates and markets unusual medical devices. We are 7 years old, founded in 2014. And I'll pause on this slide just to point out that CloudDX is not only regulated as a public company, as all public companies are, we're also highly regulated as a healthcare company. We're ISO certified for quality management. We're audited by the FDA. We're audited by Health Canada. And there's a lot of eyeballs on our operations and a lot of eyeballs on our quality and security and privacy. And that, of course, to some extent protects investors just as much as regulation in the public markets protects investors. As a private company, Brent, we raised just over 28 million Canadian dollars prior to going public. And in our go public transaction, an additional 6 million for a total raise of just under $35 million to date so far in 7 years. I also want to introduce briefly our stellar board of directors, and in particular, our lead investor, Mr. Brad Miller, who is the largest non-founder investor of CloudDX. Brad is a businessman and a family office from Vancouver, Canada, and Brad has invested with us virtually at every stage. Also, Mr. Bill Cherneski is a public name. Some of you may recognize. Bill was the former Ontario Chief Health Innovation Strategist, a member of the Ontario government during the previous administration. Bill is now EVP of government affairs at Point Click Care, a very large successful software company that does a lot of business in the United States. And there are two physicians on our board of directors. Dr. Sunny Coley is our chief medical officer and co-founder, and Dr. Gus Zakos is also a board member. And these gentlemen were instrumental in a lot of our private funding. And I'll mention this again in another slide, but as a private company, CloudDX raised a substantial amount of the private funding we did through the medical community from over 300 individual physicians. And a lot of those physicians came from these two gentlemen's networks. So virtual care is something that I think we're starting to become familiar with. And of course, due to the pandemic, and the stats are a little bit eye-raising. Previous to COVID-19 in 2019 and the very first month of 2020, really the number of virtual healthcare visits going on in North America was in the single digits, 6, 7, 8, 9%. And then immediately that changed in April of 2020. Care went virtual. By the middle of 2020, over 50% of healthcare visits of all kinds were happening virtually. That number has reduced a little bit as we've started to open up again in most parts of North America, but nevertheless is still in the 30+% range. And a virtual visit, of course, is a two-way telemedicine consult, kind of like what we're doing today on video. But remote monitoring of patients at home is another important aspect of virtual care that's very much coming on stream, because that remote monitoring aspect allows physicians and nurses, clinicians, to see telemetry in real time from their patients, gather data on symptoms, on vital signs, on the way the patient is feeling, even photographs of surgical sites and photographs of wounds. And that real-time, very timely data leads to early interventions. So if something is changing for the worse, if something's changing in a negative way, then the clinicians can intervene immediately to either change that person's care at home or get that person back into the ER of the hospital. And that early intervention, in turn, makes care much more efficient, and it makes outcomes, in many cases, dramatically better. So let's talk about virtual care platforms. Our virtual care platform, Connected Health, consists of two main components. The first component is the component that goes home with the patient. It's a kit of medical devices that are familiar to many of us: blood pressure cuff, weight scale, thermometer, pulse oximeter. CloudDX devices are unique in some ways because we actually invented them. No, we actually invent and manufacture our own pulse wave device, which is a blood pressure and cardiac monitor. And we also manufacture the scale. We manufacture the pulse oximeter. And we also ship a tablet in most of our kits that's already got our app on it, locked down. It's a very easy to use app that just works out of the box. And when many of your patients are older, they're of an older generation, that means you don't have to be pairing Bluetooth devices. You don't have to be working in sort of in the cloud and doing computer science rather. It just all magically works. And that, of course, leads to very high patient satisfaction. The second component is the Clinician Component. This is a dashboard where nurses, doctors can monitor simultaneously thousands of patients with automated software in the background that's looking for those patterns, looking for changes in vital signs, changes in survey answers, changes in the patient's condition that then create a notification that this patient needs to be addressed. And that feedback loop of notification is what drives improved care in the home. You're going to hear me talk a little bit about differentiators today. We are highly differentiated at CloudDX. We compete against some very, very large companies and win giant RFPs and large contracts in the teeth of that competition. We're deployed across Canada from coast to coast all the way up to the Yukon, so coast to coast to coast. And we're really focused right now on our US growth, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But the key to why virtual care and particularly remote monitoring is becoming more and more used all over North America today really is in these 6 value propositions. So from the point of view of post-surgical monitoring, which is a rapidly growing use case for virtual care, the key differentiator here is get the folks out of the hospital sooner. What that means is it allows that patient where they want to be, where they belong. It also reduces the burden on the hospital. When it comes to chronic care management or managing patients who have complex chronic conditions like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or congestive heart failure, being able to stay at home as long as possible and not have to move into a nursing home or an assisted living home is becoming more and more desirable, especially considering what's just happened in the last year and a half. From the point of view of the provider, though, it's also more efficient. Moving those patients out of the hospital is allowing all across Canada hospitals to address a giant multi-100,000 patient surgical backlog of surgeries, elective surgeries that were postponed during the pandemic and now are just backing up with patients getting sicker and sicker. And from the point of view of those chronic disease patients, reducing those ER visits and reducing those hospital admissions is reducing the 2 largest cost items in the entire healthcare budget across North America. It's those 2 diseases, COPD and CHF. So there's tremendous additional efficiencies when these tools are deployed correctly. From the point of view of the ultimate payers, which in the Canadian context is the taxpayers, is the federal government and the provincial governments, that efficiency means better use of resources. It means that precious healthcare dollars can go towards other things than COPD and CHF. And everything from that post-surgical transition problem to substance use, opioid reduction, there's a long, long laundry list. In the US context, these tools are reimbursed in the United States and actually become a new source of revenue, a new source of income for US providers because of the way the reimbursement system works. And these value propositions are critical to our growth. But those apply to all RPM companies. What's different about CloudDX are these following things. Because we invent our own tools and our own devices, like our pulse wave system, we're gathering data that no other provider actually gathers on cardiac functions, respiration rate, on patient behavior. We also control the user experience from the very skin of the patient, the skin of the user, all the way through that clinician portal to where that data needs to go, and even integration into electronic medical record systems. And then 2 other points, very strong points to make. First of all, as the size of company we are, we're very nimble compared to large competitors. That means we get to deliver services and features on a timeline that's very aggressive. It's faster than our competition. That helps win us jobs. And we also have extremely high marks for customer service. In third-party, independent studies that have been done, CloudDX customer service scores have been in the high 90s all the way up to 100%. And on the clinician side, a net promoter score of 82. Just when it comes to the type of sales and the type of revenues we like to talk about, I want to mention this slide and these 3 points. In many cases, especially in Canada, we have two steps to our contracts that we sign. The first step is the hardware itself, the kits, the tablets, all that tends to get paid for. And then the second step is a per patient per month recurring SaaS type revenue that flows in as patients are onboarded onto the system. And these are typically 18 to 36 month contracts. Conversely, in the United States, we amortize the cost of that equipment into that monthly per patient per month fee, because that fee is reimbursed by a specific code that pays for all of it together. That code pays much more than it does on the Canadian side. So that's a $58 per month or $60 per month payment, for example, versus approximately $35 in the Canadian side. But in the Canadian context, the equipment's already paid for. All that means is that in some cases, when you look at our financial statements, our revenue looks lumpy because we'll get a big order of equipment and that will drive up that revenue, that particular revenue number. And then in the following quarter, you'll see our subscription revenues increase dramatically. And that's a pattern we saw in Q2 of this year, for example. The third bucket is projects that are often academically funded. 2 points to make there. Again, this can be lumpy because it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it comes in pieces because it's funded by grants. And another important point, that type of project revenue actually, in some cases, is actually called other income because it's funded by government grants or government subsidies. So in that case, to truly see the dollars flowing through CloudDX, you have to add the actual revenue top line to the other income to get a full picture. So who are we talking about here as far as customers are concerned? The available market for remote patient monitoring in North America is enormous. There are over 50 million US beneficiaries of Medicare that qualify for reimbursed remote patient monitoring. From the point of view of these surgical postponements, the number is in the millions in North America, in the hundreds of thousands in Canada. And we also address those complex post-surgery cases, of which globally there are hundreds of millions, and of which in many cases, as you see here, lead to very, very serious outcomes, very serious negative outcomes. So the bottom line is the available market is tremendous. Now I want to touch on some recent announcements we've made because this will really help fill in the blanks on the growth of the next few quarters. So since we went public in just at the end of April, early May of 2021, we made an announcement regarding a partnership with Maxwell Telecare, which is a telehealth company based in Chicago. Doctors at Maxwell do telemedicine visits for two big groups, primary care providers and nursing homes. We're currently growing into that Maxwell contract. That contract gave us access to over 25,000 patients within existing Maxwell contracts, and those contract numbers continue to grow. We touched on the surgical backlog. Our customer and partner, Hamilton Health Sciences, announced they're using CloudDX technology, as well as many other hospitals across Canada, to directly address that post-surgical backlog. And in Ontario, there's a $30 million surgical transition fund designed specifically to pay for that use case. So that's the money hospitals will be using to further deploy CloudDX in the coming months and quarters. Then in August, we announced a new partnership with a company called the Gamma e-commerce Solutions. And I'm going to touch on that in just a minute. Very, very critical partnership. And then just a few weeks ago, we announced a different partnership with a company called Prism Media. So what does this mean to our go-to-market strategy? Hospitals and clinics are a large and growing market for us. We're potentially the most deployed remote monitoring solution in Canada at the moment. But we're really focusing again on those US deployments as well. And as well, entire governments. So CloudDX is the sole provider, for example, of virtual care to Yukon Health and Human Services. We also are providing virtual care to a very large Western Canadian province. And I just mentioned the Ontario Surgical Transitions Fund as well. We are a Canada Health InfoWay verified vendor. And what that means is that we're already on a pre-vetted list so that every province in Canada can just simply go ahead and purchase products and services from CloudDX. We also have enterprise contracts. These are large companies like CBI Health, the Lung Association, and even Vital Air Canada, which is the largest provider of home oxygen services in the country, that use CloudDX technologies internally for their own purposes. This might not necessarily be reimbursed by government, but these are commercial contracts. And then let's talk about DeGamma Healthcare Solutions. DeGamma is a company, one of the top e-commerce companies in Canada that addresses a specific niche, which is pregnancy. Moms use the babydoppler.com website, where they purchase a fetal Doppler device, which is a unit that allows moms to count the baby's heartbeat. DeGamma sees over 900,000 unique visitors a year and over 100,000 transactions a year. And that's a market we're growing into with regards to a maternal health tracker, a hypertension tracker for those moms who have risk factors for maternal hypertension, of which somewhere between 10 and 20% statistically will have. This means we have direct access to over 100,000 buyers who are already transacting and 900,000 plus unique visitors. So this then leads me to the story of available patients. So when we measure CloudDX growth, there's 3 steps to our deployment of connected health. The first step is under contract acquiring access to patients. Before 2021, back in 2020, even with the hospital contracts we had at that time, we had access to about 3,700 patients. They're not all enrolled yet, but that was our access to patients. By Q2, with the Maxwell contract, that grew to 31,000 plus. With the DeGamma contract, that grew to over 100,000, 130,000 plus. And then Prism Media, which is a company we have a contract with to address chronic care management patients. Prism Media, as you'll note in our press release at the time, has a database of over 1 million American chronic care management patients, which gives us tremendous access to available patients we can stratify and match with physicians who deliver reimbursed remote patient monitoring to those patients in the United States. So the first step for us is access to patients. The second step is enrolling those patients, which is what we're doing right now. We went public less than 6 months ago. The use of proceeds from that public raise first was this step, and now the next step is enrollment. The third step, of course, is the revenue that flows from that enrollment. And because of the steps we go through, that revenue is expected to be in the next several quarters, ramping more and more rapidly. By the way, CloudDX will be holding a seminar, a webinar, to directly dig into this question of the revenue pathway for CloudDX. And that webinar is on October 12th at 12 o'clock Eastern Time. And you'll find a link to register for that webinar on our website, clouddx.com. Moving on, I just want to quickly wrap up here by speaking a little bit about the future of our technology. CloudDX has a strong intellectual property portfolio with 6 granted patent families, 5 more patent families pending, and 4 registered trademarks. And most importantly, peer-reviewed studies. In this aspect, CloudDX is a very, very strong competitor. A company of our size, I don't believe has, no other company of our size has this kind of portfolio of peer-reviewed papers that prove the efficacy, prove the user experience, and user satisfaction of our technology. Our technology has been validated in hospital, it's been validated in the cath lab for accuracy, and it's these peer-reviewed published papers that give clinicians confidence to use new technology like that from CloudDX. I'll also point out that we are one of the most awarded technology companies in Canada, the first Canadian company to ever win an X Prize, winner of a 21 Edison Award, and Fast Company World-Changing Idea, and over a dozen more. So what's coming down the pipe? Starting early next year, we will be delivering a new version of our proprietary wrist cuff device called PulseWave. PulseWave 2 is the only device of its kind in the world that can not only measure blood pressure and heart rate accurately, but also measures respiration rate. You can imagine how powerful that will be in the world of long COVID, in addition to many other respiratory conditions that are out there. We have a patent on that technology, and that is absolutely proprietary to CloudDX. Following PulseWave 2, we have a new wearable device coming to market next year called Vitality. These devices come from our Tricorder X Prize endeavor, which was in fact a working science fiction-like Star Trek medical tricorder that literally was able to make autonomous diagnoses. Now, what we're doing with Vitality is monitoring all the vital signs, including respiration and blood pressure, without a cuff, continuously for several days. Vitality will be deployed in a 20,000 patient, 5-year project from McMaster University to monitor post-surgical recovery in some of the most serious cases. And the third piece of technology we'd like to talk about is an app called cough analysis. And this is a technology that can actually detect from the sound of a person coughing and measure that cough and detect what type of respiratory disease that person might have. The cough analysis program is currently in clinical validation in Africa, and the use case is tuberculosis. And there will be more details about that coming up in the next quarter or so. So there's 5 different ways we can grow CloudDX. We find within our existing hospital contracts that new use cases come up all the time. So our contracts tend to grow organically. Of course, our sales and marketing team is always aggressively signing new contracts. As these new technologies, the new devices come to market, they tap into new and different reimbursement modes. And those modes allow us to generate even further revenue. And then the last 2, of course, are new markets and acquisitions. I think I must be out of time. So I'll stop here now and I'll answer questions.
If you want to wanted to do a quick summary or something like that, Robert,
I guess we're very thrilled to be part of the solution now as the world comes out of COVID-19, but moves into new areas of risk and danger and new conditions. We're tackling some of the most important healthcare problems of our day, including post-surgical transitions that have potentially high mortality rates, and including, of course, chronic disease management, which is the largest single cost item in the entire healthcare space. As we say here on our slide, we're revenue generating, but we're also a blue sky opportunity, because these new technologies now that have been validated, they've been vetted, they've been awarded competitive awards, millions and millions of dollars in grant funding, they're now coming to market, and those devices are going to change the world.
Excellent stuff, Robert. I can tell you're extremely passionate about it. I imagine the rest of your team is very passionate. This is what investors want to see. They want to see, an exec that is 100% all on board, and it seems like you and CloudDX are absolutely there. Thanks for joining us, Robert Kaul. He's founder and CEO of CloudDX. The tickers on the Toronto venture CDX, and ticker on OTC is CDXFF.
Thank you, Brent.
Yeah, have a good day, Robert. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.